Welcome back, woodworkers. So I've got a unique challenge here that I thought I would share, and I don't know if it's that unique, come to think of it. But I need to flatten a slab, something that is large enough to fit through some of the machines, but it's creating some challenges for me. So I needed to create this flattening jig that you've probably seen people that work with slabs a lot of times. Will use something similar to this. So I started off with jointing and planing this material, but you can start to see, maybe not so much there, you start to see a lot of tearing out here. Hopefully, yeah, that's coming through. And so this is fairly consistent, and it started to get kind of nasty throughout this process. So by continuously running this through the jointer and the planer was just not a great idea. This is curly maple. So what I need to do, and I guess I could have continued running this through the jointer and planer and then snuck up on it with various hand tools or some chemical options to kind of treat some of this tearing out and just go a little bit slower to it. A thickness sander would definitely be an option as well. All of these tools don't, however, get me out of the situation that I'm running into here, where I have clients who are requesting to have this live edge here and then straight edge back here. That goes against the wall. It's going to be a floating shelf. But there's also a request to have this live edge be on the end of the piece. And so if I were able to just cut this off, great, I'm done. There's a little bit of this on the opposite face, opposite end. But anyway, so, but they wanted to keep this, and I don't blame them. It's really going to be a fantastic look and shape towards what they want to display on this piece. So the issue becomes, if I continue to run this through the planer or thickness sander or what have you, I'm not going to get away from the tearing out. I can go thickness sander, it's going to take forever, but it's going to get me so thin after I remove this if I were to just continue to go off of the planes that were presented. So I need to create this setup for wedging under here, elevating this end, but keeping the far end lower. And so once I've flattened this off now to the new surface, so once we've gone past this little rough sawn section, then I'll be able to flip it around and then get rid of any wedges that are underneath here and then really plane it down again without any tearing out or other surfaces. And I could, at that point, run the second face through thickness sander or the drum sander. And that's fine, but I need to start somewhere. So the things that I did, I sized this piece, first of all, width. There was a lot of extra material over here that got cut off, and I didn't want any problems that were over here to migrate into just the piece that I really need, making this whole thing possibly thinner than I want. So getting off that excess width, I've also cut down some excess length, pardon me, at the end. So I'm right around final dimension, but I still have a little bit of wiggle room should I need it. Anyway, by having a straight edge here, this allows me to throw some blocks in here. I've also blocked the end of this piece over here. Kind of clamped or wedged this thing over, making sure to not damage or compress that live edge. And I've done the same. This is kind of the keystone piece, the last piece that I installed. And this kind of pushes back towards that stop at the end, as well as those edge stops that I have. Then I wedged this little piece here. This goes all the way across. And I wedge that in so that it holds us in the right position. So now the lowest point here is going to be in line with the very end there at that height, so that when I plane this thing off, I'm losing as little as I possibly can to do this. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. And please, I would love any comments for you folks that have done this or do this type of work, ways to improve on this, but just it seems like there's not a whole lot to this operation. A couple things that I was thinking about. Number one is I want to take advantage of the material. So leaving these edges as wide as I can and then screwing and gluing them into these base pieces, that gives me a lot of rigidity throughout the whole piece. And by making these wide enough, I don't have to have pieces or a sheet going the whole length. I can separate these things out. This gives me ample space for clamping on these locations. And then I can also wedge wherever I need to. I can wedge from all sides. If I went with a solid piece of plywood all the way across, that's fine. Just a lot more material than I really need to dispense with. And the plywood here, again, as long as you have straight edges, top and bottom, this is going to be a nice flat surface for it. And on that note, it kind of doesn't matter the thickness of this plywood, the centerpiece, and then the end piece. They could all be the same thickness. They could be 3/4 here, 1/2 inch in the center, or vice versa. It kind of doesn't matter as long as I've got these straight edges to secure to, because I'm only working off of this reference on what is now the top. Okay, so the wider I make these elements, the better. The other thing that I need to consider is when I mount the saddle for this piece, the saddle is going to go here, and I need to consider a couple of things when cutting these to size. Number one, I need to make this slightly larger than the surface of this board. I would not want to have the material that I'm cutting rubbing on the bottom of this little side, because then that's going to start doing things that I don't want, nor can I afford. So it has to be greater than this, but there's a limit. I can't make this thing 5 or 6 inches off of the face of this, because that's going to require a huge bit to come down and do the cutting. So with this, what am I? I'm about 1/2 inch away from the surface here now. Once I start engaging in the cuts, that's going to increase a bit. But anyway, so that's kind of the rationale there. The size and shape of this, I talk about in another video, but generally, I wanted to have rigidity on these pieces, and you can tell this is just scrap that I had around. This is not pretty stuff, and it doesn't have to be. But I want to make these things wide enough to give me rigidity without interfering with where the handles are going to be in this thing. So if I make it a lot wider, I've got plenty of rigidity for a narrow piece like this. I don't know how much rigidity I really need, but if this is going to be a dining table that's 40 inches wide or so, or more, maybe this is going to start to deflect a little bit, maybe. So maybe I would beef that up a little bit more. But I want to have good space in here. It wouldn't interfere with the operation. And then the bit is also a consideration for what it is I want to do. As I talked about, I need to make sure that I have a bit long enough to do this cut. But the diameter of this is kind of an issue. Obviously, big difference between the amount of labor, amount of time this is going to take me. If I'm using a 1/4 inch bit to run across this, that's just nuts. That's crazy, and I'm going to get nowhere fast. If I use a 1/2 inch bit, which is a fairly common size, just a straight bit, then I think I can get away with making some progress on this, but it would be better if that bit was wider. And instead of running out and buying a new bit for just this operation, I started to look around at what bits I have access to. And I saw that I have this bit, which is a dovetail bit here, and it's one that I don't know if I've ever used it. It came in this set, and it's going to be perfect for this. The straight edges are not really important like this one is showing, because I'm really going to be doing the majority of the cutting on the bottom of this bit with just a little bit of the edge work. And so in essence, I'm just going to be planing on the top of this bit. So the angles are not going to interfere with what I'm doing. I just need something that's wider than the 1/2 inch, and this is the widest one I have, and I don't anticipate needing that for any other kind of specialty cuts. So once I've got that in place, then I'm able to set this into my little sled and then run this across back and forth wherever I need to. Yeah, that's probably a good enough place to end here. There's a couple of considerations to designing this sled, and I talked about this in the other video, but I didn't want to create something that was going to be just so big that it's going to be awkward to use and get around and store in the shop should I want to hang on to this setup. So I thought a nice compact little sled like this makes sense. You can see that I've got clearance on both sides, and it runs pretty freely in place, which is exactly what I want. So this thing is in there. I'm able to turn this thing on, just allowing a little bit of pressure and guidance on this thing, and it should be ready to go. Okay, I think that's everything. Next video will be the setup of this little saddle, and then I'll start doing some cutting. Thanks.